call you KCM organize. Okay. Good evening. Welcome to today's Asset Colloquium. Today's talk is going to be on why it is still difficult being a woman in science. This very special colloquium is going to be given by Professor Shobhana Narasimhan from Jawaharlal Nehru Center for Advanced Scientific Research, Bengaluru. This talk has been kind of made possible by Professor Vandana Nanal, and in fact, this was to be kind of held as a part of a cluster of talks by Professor Shobhana Narasimhan. One eventually she gave in the Vidushi program that was part of the TIFR 75 that was organized, but of course we couldn't organize this as a part of colloquium, and you know the reasons very well, but ASET is very happy, at least Shobhana has agreed to give this as an online version of our talk. Without taking any more time, I request Professor Vandana Nanal to introduce today's speaker and also conduct the rest of the proceedings. Vandana.
Yeah, thank you, Satya. It's a pleasure to introduce Shobhana Narasimhan to this audience. As Satya mentioned, actually, she was supposed to have given 3 talks, a colloquium, a Vigyan Vidushi talk, and ASET colloquium. And this was organized in July, but then the corona actually changed all the configurations and all the events. So we are having, we're still holding her to her promise of having 3 talks, but distributed, and she has kindly agreed. To many of you in the audience, Shobhana may not need an introduction, but she is one of the TIFR family, grew up in the TIFR colony, and she also has actually academic connection with TIFR apart from the collaborations and so on. She was a VSRP student here in 84. She did her MSc in IIT Bombay in 1985, where she was the Institute Silver Medalist. From then, she went to Harvard University to complete her PhD. After a postdoc at Brookhaven National Lab and Fritz Haber Institute in Berlin, she joined as faculty in JNCSSR, and where she still now works as a professor in Theoretical Science Unit. Her research area is computational nanoscience. She is very, very well known for her work. She's a fellow of National Academy of Sciences, USA, American Academy of Arts and Science, and she's also fellow of Indian Academies. In addition to her research, which is, of course, she is excelling, she has a strong interest in promoting the cause of women in science and in teaching physics in developing countries. In India, she has been connected with women in science in many ways. She has played a lead role. She has been representing the country in the International Conference for Women in Physics. She has been also involved with various activities which are organized through the ICTS for women in science. And as somebody just was mentioning in the chit chat before the meeting, she actually is also, there's an article on her article in the book Leelavati's Daughters, which was brought out by Professor Rohini Godbole and Professor Ram Ramaswamy, which features a lot of main Indian women scientists who have been very well established and well known. So when Shobhana gave the talk in the Vigyan Vidushi, it was really very well received, and I told her at that time that she's very calm when she comes across to make the point. And today, I think that makes her point also much more effectively. And today she's going to tell that we always talk about why few women in physics or science, but I think what she has put in the bracket is more important, why still there are few women. So Shobhana, over to you.
Can you see my screen now? You can see my screen, right?
We can see your screen, and
yeah.
You can now open up. Yeah, that's
okay, let's just move this out of the way. Okay, so thank you, Vandana. It's a great pleasure to give this talk. The only sad thing, of course, is that I can't be there in person. TIFR is a very special place for me, close to my heart. Sometime I'll tell you all the story about the first talk I gave in TIFR, which is a funny story. Anyway, so today I'm going to talk about why it is still hard to be a woman in science. I gave a very similar talk earlier this year in ICTS, and I know some of you have watched the video of that talk. It's largely similar talk, though I've made some changes. So of course we celebrate the few women in science who have made a mark, but how was life for them? Did they suffer because of being women? And how is it today? Are things getting better, and can they be made easier? These are some of the things I want to talk about. So the most famous woman scientist is, of course, Marie Curie. And we hear a lot about her achievements and how she struggled scientifically. You know, she had to process tons and tons of pitch blende to isolate radium, polonium, etc. But we don't hear that much about her struggles specifically as a woman, as a mother, as a wife. These are some quotations from her. She says, I have frequently been questioned, especially by women, about how I could reconcile family life with a scientific career. Well, it has not been easy. And she says, I have a great deal of work, what with the housekeeping, the children, the teaching, and the laboratory, and I don't know how I shall manage it all. So she was doing this path-breaking scientific work, but she still had to deal with the housekeeping. She had to deal with looking after her children, all this. And this, of course, is a fundamental problem for women in science even today. And maybe some of you know about this, but I think a lot of people still don't know that she was celebrated, but she was also attacked a lot. And these attacks became much worse after her husband, Pierre Curie, died. So, for example, she was nominated to the French Academy. She was nominated for election. So the French Academy is rather special because there's only a definite number of people who can be elected. The number of people is limited. And so only if a current member dies can someone else be elected. So you're really competing against others for a single seat on that academy. And when it was proposed that she be elected, there had never been a woman member. And there were really attacks against her in the popular press of the day. And there were lots of rumors that she had been having an affair with Langevin, who, as many of you know, was also a well-known physicist. But he was married, and there weren't attacks against him for having supposedly an adulterous affair. There were attacks against her, and the attacks against her said that she was spoiling the memory of her dead husband. And this is a picture of a newspaper attack on her. As you can see, they've chosen photographs to make her look deliberately unflattering. And apparently, you know, people would collect outside her house and shout and throw stones and things like that. So she had to deal with these things, which I think are really attacking her as a woman. And she was not elected to the French Academy. And this was around the time when she was nominated, she was awarded her second Nobel Prize. And there were people who said that it would not be appropriate for her to accept it because her name was under a cloud and she should not accept it until her name was cleared. So I could, of course, talk about lots of different Indian women who have suffered similarly. I thought I would talk about Kamala Sohonie. I don't know how many of you know her. She was an Indian biochemist, and she seems to have been the first Indian woman to get a PhD in India in any branch of science. There were other Indian women who went abroad and got a PhD. And she wanted to work at the Indian Institute of Science. And C.V. Raman said that she should not be admitted specifically because she was a woman. He thought that women could not do science. He also thought that having a woman present would be a distraction to the men. And she finally staged a satyagraha and he gave in and let her be admitted. And she did very pioneering studies on nutrition, and she discovered this enzyme called cytochrome C. And this is what she had to say about her experience. She said, though Raman was a great scientist, he was very narrow-minded. I can never forget the way he treated me just because I was a woman. And, you know, she says she wasn't admitted as a regular student. This was a great insult. And the bias against women was so bad at that time. What can one expect if even a Nobel laureate behaves in such a way? So this was, of course, many decades back. Are things better now? So I could again use many different examples, but I took this, which you may have seen. It came just 3 days ago in the newspaper, The Hindu. This is an interview with Soumya Swaminathan, who is the chief scientist of the World Health Organization. And she said, amongst other things, it was only after I started my career in a government research institution that I experienced the culture of a male-dominated committee room. That's when you felt you were being talked down to or made fun of almost. I was not taken seriously. I was always told what to do. And if I had any ideas, they would be shot down. I think that is the way many of our institutions function. They're very patriarchal. So I've told you that it's difficult being a woman in science. What are the reasons? I've tried to list some of them. There are very few women. This itself causes problems. There are pressures due to family responsibilities, as I mentioned in the context of Marie Curie. There is discrimination and bias. This can be explicit or even more insidiously, it can be implicit. You have a sense of isolation and a lack of a peer group. You lack mentorship. You have often to deal with a rather hostile work environment. This is, of course, worst if you have to deal with sexual harassment, and you often have a lack of recognition. So let me talk about each of these things one by one. So few in number. So as all of you are aware, historically, the number of women in science has been low. This is a very famous picture of scientists. It shows the Solvay Conference in 1927. This is sometimes called the picture of the most intelligent gathering ever, because nearly everyone in this picture went on to win a Nobel Prize. And of course, there's only one woman in this gathering, and that is Marie Curie. And you may say, okay, this was a very long time ago. So keep this picture in mind, and I will remind you of it later in this talk. How are things now? So this is a map of the world, and the countries are colored according to the percentage of women who are working scientists in that country. And the darker the color, the greater the percentage of women scientists in that country. And there seems to be only one country where it is 50% or greater, and that is Myanmar, Burma, which is very interesting and perhaps unexpected to many of us. So here are UNESCO statistics from 2018 for the percentage of researchers in science who are women. So it's 28.8% for the world as a whole. And then I've just listed a few statistics by region. And I think we all have our preconceptions. And so I've listed some of these just to tell you that you may be surprised by some of these numbers. Okay, so the Arab states, it's much more than it is for the world on average. It's 39.8%. North America and Western Europe, supposedly bastions of liberalism, 32.3%. And sub-Saharan Africa, almost the same number, 31.3%. We fall under South and West Asia, which is 18.5%, which is the smallest in this list. Okay, so I want to talk a bit about India here. And I have to tell you that I was very shocked when I saw the statistics for India, because I had always thought that, okay, we're not doing great, but we're still doing not so bad compared to the rest of the world. So these are the numbers for countries in Asia, the percentage of science researchers who are women. And India is worst than every other Asian country except Nepal. We have 13.9% of our scientific researchers are women. So Bangladesh has a higher percentage, Pakistan has a higher percentage, Sri Lanka has a higher percentage. So we're doing really badly in India. So I thought a bit about why do we have this perception that it is different? I think this perception is because in absolute numbers, we have a larger number because we have more scientists in the country as a whole. So we probably have a fair number of women scientists, but if you look at it as a percentage, then it is abysmally low. Okay, you can also look at other statistics. This is statistics from this paper, which was published in PLOS Bio a couple of years ago. They looked at the percentage of authors of scientific papers who were women, and they looked at millions of papers. They looked at papers in PubMed as well as on the archive. And here are countries ranked by the percentage of papers from scientific authors from that country who are women. And this percentage is a bit higher, but still India is almost at the bottom. Only a few countries, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, Japan, are lower than us. It's also very interesting that in these statistics, typically poor countries often do better than rich countries. So three very rich countries, Switzerland, Germany, and Japan, do rather badly when you look at the position of women in science. So you may have noticed that I called it the Enigma of India. So I called it an enigma because if you look at some other indicators, India doesn't do that badly. So if you look, for example, at airplane pilots, so this is again a profession which is traditionally male dominated. And if you look at all the airlines in the world and you look at what percentage of their pilots are women, again, the percentages are small, but the three airlines that have the highest percentage of women pilots are all Indian airlines. There's Indigo, SpiceJet, and Air India. And then comes Norwegian, United Airlines, Lufthansa, Air Canada, etc. So I really do not understand why we're doing better than the rest of the world when it comes to pilots and why we're doing worse than them when it comes to scientists. So this is something we really need to introspect about. So now here are more statistics about women scientists in India. This is ranked by the umbrella organizations. So DBT, not very surprisingly perhaps, has the largest percentage of employees, scientist employees who are women. So that's a little over 30%, and then it goes down and down and down until you come to ICAR. Okay, so there's an organization, a very new organization called Bias Watch India. I will talk about them more later on. And they have been assembling statistics about women in science in India. So they have assembled what they call a base rate. That is how many women you have in academia in India in various fields. So this is data from 34 leading institutions in India. So you see the highest is, this is by subject. So biology is the highest, which is 22.3%. That's still very low, okay? Because biology, you say, oh, biology, we're doing well. 22.3% is still nowhere near parity. Then maths, then computer science, physics, 10.9%. And then finally, all the way down to engineering, which is 7.9%. Okay, so how about the institutions? Here, I mean, they have data for far more institutions. I just picked a few. So NCBS has the largest percentage of women faculty. It has about 37% women faculty. Then comes IBAB. These are again biology institutes. So you may say that's not very surprising. But then comes RRI, and RRI is mostly physics. So RRI is doing very well. It has about 27%, which is well above the base rate for physics. Then come some of the newer IITs like IIT Palakkad, IIT Jodhpur, etc. JNC is not doing so badly, whereas TIFR Mumbai is towards the bottom. I believe it has 7.9%. That includes physics, biology, everything. And right at the bottom is TIFR Hyderabad, which has 3.7%. Okay, so this is something I believe you should discuss in your faculty meetings. These are statistics which I assembled many years ago. I wanted to have some time to update them before today's talk, but I didn't get the time. This is data for men faculty versus women faculty in physics in various departments. And I apologize, at that time, I was not being very politically correct, and I used blue for men and pink for women. And I tried to change that yesterday, and this was an old PowerPoint slide, and I wasn't able to change it. But I want to point out to you that TIFR had the worst gender ratio of all the places I considered. And I don't think it has changed significantly since I assembled these data many years ago. And I also want to tell you a story about how, when I pointed this out to various people in TIFR, this was again many years ago, the reactions I received were not very encouraging. One person told me that the reason TIFR has the worst ratio is because TIFR is the best place in India. And another person said, oh, but at least we have some. When I studied in the USA, there were no women faculty in my department. So nobody was really interested in hearing about this. So are things getting better? So, well, they are, but incredibly slowly, okay? So in this same paper in PLOS Bio, they have looked at different countries and at the rate at which the number of women is going up, or the rate at which the authorship of papers by women is going up in different fields. And it is increasing so slowly that, for example, in physics, which is one of the worst fields, they estimated that if the rate of improvement continues to be the same, it will be another 258 years till gender parity is achieved. And by gender parity, they meant 45% women. 45% of authors of physics papers will be women. So 258 years, I mean, that's really shocking. And in some fields, for example, computer science in the USA, you actually are seeing a reverse trend. So computer science, in the early days, you might have heard that all the computer operators and the computer scientists were women. Like you might have seen this movie, Hidden Figures. But now it is slowly becoming more and more male dominated, and you actually see the reverse trend where the percentage of women is going down steadily. So let me talk now about pressures due to family responsibilities.
Professor Shobhana,
yeah.
Can I interrupt you? Is it possible to take some questions during your talk?
I would prefer to take them after, if that's okay. Is that all right?
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
All right.
Yeah.
So societal and familial pressures. So these are some quotes that I took from Leelavati's daughters. So someone saying the principal addressed our class and urged the girls who had opted for science to give up their seats in favor of boys with lower marks. My husband did not want me to go away for a long time, but somehow I could convince him. I fought a lot to convince my parents about the importance of going abroad for postdoctoral studies. It was not common for a girl to stay on her own in distant places. I got married, though I was not keen to get married. I had to fulfill my parents' wishes. Upon the arrival of my son, I found it very hard to devote myself full-time to research. My husband, a well-known astrophysicist, respected my wish to study mathematics, so he too did not wish me to prioritize career over family. And I see that these issues continue to be important because I see how my female students struggle both during their PhDs and after. So what happens during a woman's career? So in the US, they have what they call the leaky pipeline, where every stage in their academic career, the percentage of women seems to drop down. So as you go from PhD to postdoc to assistant professor to associate professor, etc., the percentage drops down steadily. If you look in India, it seems to be a different pattern, which is what I call a waterfall, which is that there's a fairly large percentage of science PhDs that are going to women. So it was about 44%. But if you look at our scientific workforce, it's only 14%. Now, you may think that's because long ago, very few science PhDs went to women. And if you look at it a few years from now, 20 years from now, maybe 44% of our scientific workforce will be women. But that does not, unfortunately, seem to be the case. It seems to be that we really have a problem where a lot of women are getting PhDs and then dropping out of the scientific workforce. Okay, so if you look at working scientists and women in one survey that was done in India, 25% of them had had a break in career. And this is those who continued in science, okay? We're not even looking at those who dropped out and never returned to a career in science. If you look at the reasons for their break in career, the most common reason is family care. And then the next most common reason is location shift. And of course, usually the most common reason for a location shift is that somebody got married to someone who lived in another city and then they had to move. And so they couldn't continue with their job. There was recently a very big study. It's called the Gender Gap in Science study. It interviewed more than 32,000 scientists, men and women, from 159 countries and looked at how gender affects various aspects of one's scientific career. So they asked people, did becoming a parent affect your career progression? And in this graph, the answers are categorized by their subject. And you see that across subjects, about 10 to 11% of men said it did affect their careers, but way more women, typically 30 to 40% of women said it affected their careers. So it clearly affects women disproportionately. And also, this is another survey, which was a global survey of about 15,000 physicists, and it asked them, who does the majority of the housework in your family? And in less developed countries, 40% of the women said myself and 8% of the men said myself. And in highly developed countries, 33% of the women said myself and 8% of the men said myself. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're in a rich country or a poor country. The burden of housework clearly falls disproportionately on women. There's also what is known typically as the two-body problem, which is the problem that of finding two jobs for a scientist couple in the same city. Now, most female scientists tend to get married to male scientists, but the reverse is obviously not true just because there aren't enough women scientists to go around. Okay, and so now many institutions in India have either a written or unwritten rule that they will not hire couples. So it is very, very hard for a scientist couple to get jobs in the same city. If you're in a big city like Mumbai and Bangalore, you can at least hope that there are two different institutions which might hire you. But if you're in a small city, like say Allahabad or Kanpur or even a smaller city than that, then it's very unlikely that there are two good institutions where you can both be hired. Okay, and so this was a survey that was published in Nature where people were asked how severely did the two-body problem impact you? And you can see that on almost every single case, women said it impacted them. The blue bars are women and the green bars are men, and women said it impacted them much more than men did. Okay, so another problem is age limits for jobs. So there is an unwritten rule in India that you have to be under 35 to be employed as an assistant professor. And this rule impacts women more than men because women are much more likely to have had a break in their career because you are likely to have had a break to have had children, for example, because that age under 35 is most likely when you've had children. And the UGC says there is no such official rule, but if you look at advertisements for jobs, then it does say this. So for example, this is an ad that's up on the web right now for ICER Thiruvananthapuram, and it says age preferably below 35 years. What about discrimination and bias? So in the same gender gap in science survey, men are 4.8 times as likely to say that they have never experienced discrimination. So it's a complicated question. What is discrimination and how do you define discrimination? So first of all, let's see, is there a productivity gap? Now, even earlier today, I was looking up various surveys on this on the web, and some people say there's no productivity gap and some say there is a productivity gap. But in general, the consensus seems to be that if you look at productivity as the number of papers published, then women do in general seem to publish fewer papers than men. So this is, for example, a study in mathematics, and it shows, depending on when they got their PhD, how many years after their career start, how many papers men and women published relative to each other. And women do seem to publish less than men do. But there are also studies which suggest that women publish fewer papers, but they publish longer papers. And nowadays, there is a tendency to just count papers and count citations. And if you're publishing the same research in fewer, longer papers, then it's going to hurt you in those metrics. Okay, now let's forget that. Let's forget how many papers they're publishing. Supposing you have a man and a woman who are publishing exactly the same number of papers in exactly the same journals. Can you compare how they are evaluated in their careers for grants, for example? So this was a paper that was published in Nature several years ago. This looked at grants in Sweden, and it's interesting it was in Sweden because Sweden is generally touted as a country which has great gender equality. So it controlled for differences in productivity, impact, etc. So what on the x-axis is the impact of the person applying for the grant, and the impact was measured by how many papers they had which journals they published in, etc. And then on the y-axis is how the referees evaluated these people. Okay, what evaluation they were given. So on the x-axis is what you think might be an objective score, and on the y-axis is what you think might be a subjective score. And you can see that for the same impact, the men were ranked much, much higher than the women. So clearly there is some bias operating here. So women had to perform on general 2.5 times as well to get the same score as men. So that's a huge extra barrier to climb. And another way of telling you what it means to perform 2.5 times as well is you have to have 3 extra papers in science or nature to get the same evaluation as a man. Okay. There's another study which looked at, they took identical CVs, but they put male names and female names on them and asked faculty, would you hire this person? How do you evaluate the competence of this person? What salary would you give this person? And the interesting thing is both male and female faculty ranked the CVs much higher when they had a male name on them. Okay, so why are there these biases? Now, of course, there may be people who are just downright sexist and say women should not do science, women should stay at home, I will never hire a woman. And believe me, there are people like that still around. I have heard those comments. But what is much more insidious is these implicit biases that we have. So there's this riddle, you might have come across it. It says a man and his son were at a level crossing in their car. A train came and hit the car. The man was killed instantly. His son was severely wounded. The son was taken to the hospital in an ambulance and wheeled to the operation theater for immediate surgery. The surgeon came in, masked and gowned, but looked at the patient and said, I can't operate on this boy. He is my son. How is this possible? Now, I have asked this riddle to many people, and people look totally confused and they say, oh, maybe it is the grandfather, maybe it is the stepfather, maybe it is a gay couple and the boy had 2 fathers. But of course, the simple answer is that maybe it is the mother and the surgeon is the boy's mother. But people don't think of that because as soon as you hear the word surgeon, the mental picture you have is of a man who is masked and gowned. Now, why do we have these mental pictures and do we all have them? So I have to make a confession here. And the reason I'm making this confession is to tell you that we should really accept that many of us may have these implicit biases. So this is a story about many years ago. The first time that I was on a plane that was flown by a woman pilot, the captain's voice came on over the intercom and she said, hello, this is your captain speaking. And for a fraction of a second, the first thought that went into my mind was, oh my God, the pilot is a woman. I hope she knows how to fly this plane. And then, of course, I was completely shocked and horrified at myself. I was really appalled. I thought, how can I have this thought? This is so against everything I believe in. What's wrong with me? But deep within me, there are these biases that men can fly planes, women cannot fly planes. Now, where do these biases come from? So there is this test that you can take online. I would recommend that all of you do it. And it checks whether you have these biases. Do you feel that men should do science, or do you feel women should do science? Do you feel men should work at home in the kitchen? Do you feel women should work at home in the kitchen? You may be quite shocked by what you find out about yourself. Just check and find out. And of course, where these biases come from is that from early childhood, we are exposed to these images. Here's a page from an elementary school book. The only profession that a woman is shown at here is a school teacher. All the other professions are men. Now, of course, in ISRO, we have had very successful women. For example, in the Chandrayaan-2 mission, both the project director and the mission director were a woman. And I don't know how many of you saw this movie, Mission Mangal, which was supposed to promote the fact that ISRO had women scientists, but I was not very happy with the way they were promoted because, for example, this woman, she gets her brilliant scientific ideas when making puris. Now, I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with the woman making puris. There isn't also anything wrong with her getting her scientific ideas when making puris. But I still think there's a certain kind of gender narrative that it is promoting, which is what results in us having all these inbuilt biases. Lack of recognition. This is a picture that was put on Facebook and Twitter a couple of years ago. This shows the President of India with the Science Minister, the DST Secretary, the directors of all the ISAs, the directors of all the IITs, etc. And notice there isn't a single woman present. So these are the people who are shaping science policy in our country, and there are no women present. Our science academies, recognition of achievement in science. These are countries colored according to what percentage of members, fellows of their science academies are women. It goes up only to 30%. In South Africa and Mexico, it's 30%. In India, as you can see, it is much, much lower. Most academies in science have at least 80% male membership. Nobel Prizes. Okay, so you can see that in science so far, only 3.68% of Nobel Prizes have gone to women. Marie Curie is very famous for having been given 2 Nobel Prizes, but if you look a little deeper, for example, her first Nobel Prize, the committee had planned to give it only to Becquerel and Pierre Curie, and someone wrote to Pierre Curie saying that you two are expected to get it, and he wrote a letter to the committee pleading that Marie Curie also be given it, and then they relented and gave it. So if it was not for his intervention, she would never have got it. In India, we have our Bhatnagar prizes. If you look on the website of the Department of Women and Child Development, it says several women scientists have been honored with the prestigious SS Bhatnagar Award. What do they mean by several? Again, it's about 3%. And part of the problem with this might be that, again, there's an age limit here. There's an age limit of 45%. And several studies have shown that women scientists tend to be productive typically later in their careers than male scientists do. There are very famous examples of women who have been overlooked for the Nobel Prize. This is one of them, Jocelyn Bell-Burnell. She discovered pulsars, and her PhD advisor, who was male, of course, did not believe her, mocked her. And when the Nobel Prize was given, he was recognized for it. She was not given it. And she has shared the fact that not only did she not get the Nobel Prize, she even struggled to get a postdoctoral position because her advisor told people she was not very good. And as late as 2014, I was present when somebody asked Sir Martin Rees, who was the astronomer royal and the president of the Royal Society, what he thought about her being overlooked for the Nobel Prize. And he said, I don't see why she should have been given the Nobel Prize. After all, she wasn't really serious about physics. She was just following her husband around. So I told you about that picture of Marie Curie at the Solvay conference, the only woman around. This is a picture of me at a conference in Shanghai in 2010. I don't know if you can find me. You have to look very carefully. There I am, hidden away amongst all these men. And I believe there is one other woman here. So it happens to me all the time that I'm the only woman at a conference. And there are also many, many conferences which have no women at all. There is now this organization, website, Twitter, etc., called Bias Watch India. It's been started by Vaishnavi Anantnarayanan and Shruti Muralidhar, and they keep a watch on conferences in India and various committees in India, and they document and list gender biased panels. So they count how many women speakers there are or how many women participants there are on the panel or the committee, and they compare it to the base rate in that field. And if you consistently see fewer women than the base rate, then you, I think, are safe in concluding that there's some bias going on. Here is an example of a program that was held last week on October 10. It says, Women Scientists into the Center Stage, okay, which I think is a very ironic title, given that you, in the center, you have these three pictures of men, and they have no women speakers, they have no women scientists, except right in one corner, they're the organizers of the session. Okay, so what can you do about this? You can have concerted efforts to change numbers. So for example, I participate in this series of conferences called the Total Energy Conferences. And every year it's organized by three scientists. And one year I was one of the three organizers. We were all three women. And the way these speakers are chosen is that the organizers shortlist a series of a list of possible speakers, and there is a committee of men and women who votes on this list. And we just made sure that there were lots of women on this short list. And we got so many good women on this short list that the year when we were the organizers, there was a much higher percentage of women speakers. So people just overlook the women often. It's not that there aren't good women scientists as possible speakers. People just say, oh, there aren't any women, or they say, oh, she's so busy, she will never come. But if you invite them, believe me, they will come. Lack of peer group and mentorship. This is a common scenario, okay? After work, the men get together, they go out drinking, and the women are left out. The women are left out either because they're too busy with family responsibilities and they just can't join, or they're just not invited. Now, why is this important? This is important not just for socializing, but also because at these meetings, collaborations are forged. People give each other important advice on how to apply for a grant, how to reply to a referee report. They're very important in getting ahead in your career, and women are just left out. Now, I have this story that some of you might have heard before. Once, some of the men I know were going out drinking after work, and I usually never go, and they never ask me. But this one time I wanted to go, and I said, can I come too? And they looked at each other a little uncomfortably, and then finally one of them said, no. And I was so shocked I said, what do you mean no? How can you say no? And then one of them said, a decent woman wouldn't come where you're going, where we are going. And I was just really taken aback. I mean, to this day, I don't know where they were going. And I was really upset. And afterwards, he said, oh, if you really want, we'll go somewhere else. You can come. And then, of course, I said, no, then I don't want to come. And then later, someone took me aside and said, look, believe me, you really do not want to come along when we go out drinking. You will be made to feel really uncomfortable. And I think it's really sad that this is the scenario in this day and age. A hostile work environment. Now, the last time I gave this talk, I put these pictures which were of little stories, little funny stories of how I was made to feel uncomfortable as a woman. But I thought about it just before this talk, and I thought, let me tell you about what it really means to work in a hostile work environment. Let me tell you the kinds of things I've had to go through. Okay, so for example, when I first joined the institute where I work in, people went to lunch in groups, and nobody ever asked me to go to lunch with them. And if I said, can I join you for lunch? They would say, no, it's okay. I'm not going now. I don't want to go for lunch, etc. And then finally, I made one friend, a male friend, because there weren't women around. And we went to lunch maybe 3 or 4 times together. And then everybody started saying, we're having an affair. And then, of course, I got really upset. And then I stopped going for lunch with him. And then I went for lunch alone. I think this is an example of a hostile work environment. And then some years later, I was at the lunch table with some of my colleagues, and they were talking about something completely different. And then they started talking about whether Hindu men have more wives or Muslim men have more wives. That is multiple wives. And apropos of nothing, one of my colleagues, male colleagues, said, no, Hindu men don't have many wives. If they do, it is only because women like Shobhana throw themselves at them. And nobody said anything. None of my colleagues said anything. And I was so shocked and so upset. And then I said, you can't talk about me like that. What do you mean? How dare you talk about me like that? And he didn't apologize. He just said, yeah, me and my big mouth. Is that an apology? Is this a friendly environment? How does one work in such an environment? And these are not even the worst things that can happen to a woman. Okay, so this is the kind of environment that you have to operate in as a woman scientist. So it's a chilly climate we work in. Okay, there are lots of other stories people say. Again, these are from Leelavati's daughters. I often heard my productivity dismissed as she just writes many papers, and my several single author papers seen as evidence of some kind of inability to collaborate. Okay, how people see women wanting to do physics as primarily for time pass until succeeding in finding a spouse. Okay, I should tell you, right now, I'm really upset after having had to tell you what I've had to go through. It's very hard for me to continue. I mean, Vandana said, I'm calm. I'm not calm now. It is very upsetting for me to have to tell you the kinds of things that I've had to put up with as a woman scientist. It's very hard to be calm and measured and rational when you have to tell people the kinds of things you had to put up with as a woman scientist. So here are stories about Rosalind Franklin and misogyny. So you all know, I suppose, about Rosalind Franklin. She's one of the people who made important advances in finding the structure of DNA. And these are quotes from James Watson's book, The Double Helix. And he talks about her terribly. He says, by choice, she did not emphasize her feminine qualities. Though her features were strong, she was not unattractive. and might have even been quite stunning had she taken even a mild interest in clothes. This she did not. There was never lipstick. Her dresses showed all the imagination of English blue-stocking adolescents. It was quite easy to imagine her the product of an unsatisfied mother who unduly stressed the desirability of professional careers that could save bright girls from marriages to dull men. And then, he says things like, there was no denying that she had a good brain. If only she could keep her emotions under control, there would be a good chance she could really help him. So constant putting down of women and this idea that they should be in a subservient position, they should only aid people. They should not have projects of their own, ideas of their own. So Aaron Klug, who worked with Rosalind Franklin, said she was a pretty tough person, single-minded, spoke what she believed, and could in fact be quite fierce. And if she had been a man, it would have gone totally unremarked. So this is the dilemma you face as a woman in science. If you are soft-spoken, if you are mild-mannered, you get totally stomped on and ignored. But if you speak up, then people say you are pushy, you are aggressive, you're arrogant, and you are disliked. And then also people react very negatively to you. So you are sort of damned if you do and damned if you don't. Then this is another thing that women face a lot. That is, if you are talking, you are interrupted a lot. Like when I started out in science, I was very diffident, and I would ask questions saying, excuse me, maybe I misunderstood you, but maybe do you think this could be, etc. And people would just ignore me. And so I learned to talk in clear sentences and say, excuse me, I don't think I agree with your statement about that. And then people started telling me that I was really aggressive. And I think men who talk the same way, people don't react as negatively. And I've had really weird reactions from men at conferences. And I have felt that this is especially sometimes from foreign men who see me at an Indian conference, with my salwar kameez and my bindi and all, and they expect me to have a sort of, submissive personality. And then they're really shocked when I don't fit that mold. And they come and say things to me like, oh, you have a lot to say for yourself. And, oh, you speak up a lot. And I don't know how to react, because I don't think at this stage of my career I should be receiving comments like this. There's an ongoing case of Bropropriating, as it is called, which you might have heard of. For many years, there's been this very excellent website called The Life of Science. It's an Indian website, which has been featuring stories about the careers in science of women and minorities. And now their name has been appropriated by this new initiative by Pallav Bagla, supported by DST and Vigyan Prasad. And I think this is really a case of plagiarism, but they are refusing to accept that or to apologize. And let's wait to see. I mean, this is really ongoing, and let's just wait to see how it plays out. Sexual harassment, I have almost run out of time, so I won't say much about it, except to tell you, believe me, sexual harassment is widespread, it is prevalent. People say there are fake cases. I cannot comment on every single case, but believe me, there are lots and lots of real cases of sexual harassment. This is from that same Gender Gap in Science survey. And look at the percentage of women who say they have personally encountered sexual harassment. and look at the percentage of men. It's interesting. Also, some small percentage of men have encountered sexual harassment, but 20 to 40% of women have personally encountered sexual harassment. And that is a really large number. And there are all these misconceptions. People say it doesn't happen in India, or married men do not harass women. Believe me, these are not true. Okay, so I'm going to skip all this. I just want to say that I am not a man hater. I would call myself a feminist, but I do consider my male colleagues to be my friends, and I do have good working relationships with them. And I want to conclude by telling all the women in science, stay strong and don't give up. Thank you.
Thank you, Shobhana, for really a very nice talk. I know it was very difficult for you, but it's good that you actually talked about some of your personal experiences, because it brings it out even for the students. This is all very informative, and they know that somebody else has faced it. They will find it easier to go through. I would just add that typically when somebody reacts, it's the reaction of the people around is also you're making a mountain out of a molehill. It is such a trivial thing. Why you want to take it?
So when the incidents happened that I told you about, people told me things like, don't brood about it, just forget about it, don't think about it anymore, just ignore it, don't file a complaint, etc.
So there are quite a few questions. I'm sure they're also in the YouTube. So we'll start with Ullas, because Ullas had a question early on.
Yeah, hi, Shobhana, really nice talk. Enjoyed it. So one of the things, I think you did address the few points about, really the reasons why some of our excellent graduate students uh, who are girls actually fail to make it to the next level. And one of the things that, for example, some of us do in the lab is trying to really push them. And of course, there are a lot of societal biases. And in some sense, they're themselves made to believe that probably I need to compromise more than my family. And in some sense, maybe I should not do this. So that's one thing. But I think one of the difficult things that I find is that this implicit bias. The explicit bias is obvious. You can probably find mechanisms to fight them. The implicit bias is really the worst thing. And is there a way to actually? I'm just proposing something very radical. People who go on to positions of power anywhere, they should take a test on implicit bias. And if they're seen to be biased against or in favor, maybe they should not get these positions. I mean, how do you quantify biases and how do you change
So
these
I
things?
think
Because it's very
implicit
difficult.
bias, first of all, I think the first thing is to be aware that you have it.
Right.
And if somebody has implicit bias, I don't think you should necessarily punish them by removing them from that position, but make them aware that they have it, and then tell them you should consciously fight against it.
No, what I mean to say is that is it possible to actually have a lot of people take these tests which make oneself aware of the implicit biases that all of us have? I mean, that's what I mean to say. It's not just question. Awareness is first thing to even know whether we have implicit bias.
Absolutely. I would agree with you. Absolutely. Now, so for example, now DST is saying that it is going to start a scheme by which institutions are rated according to how women friendly they are,
right,
or how gender sensitive they are. And as part of these programs, they should sensitize both men and women to these issues. And obviously, taking these kinds of tests should be one of the first steps in that, right? Because, for example, I was shocked to find that I had a bias against women pilots.
Yeah, exactly.
And the solution to that shouldn't be that I should be banned from flying. I should work on that bias myself and then tell myself, no, I have to overcome this bias.
Right. So one is, that's what I meant to say. One is to understand and appreciate that one has a bias and then work towards actually mitigating that bias. And that's a very important thing to recognize who you are. The last thing I will ask is, I've come across situations where, I don't want to give specifics, but there have been applicants or applications where some gaps, okay, in careers. I mean, this has of course been affected both for men and women. I would say that where people say, oh, I don't know what he or she was doing. It's been 6 months since he or she has come back from a postdoc. But I think I've seen that much more adversely affect women than men, right? It could, for all reasons, I could be just traveling around the
I have lost you. I can't hear you.
We lost a part of voice. Maybe we will come back to you later.
world and wanted to take.
Okay,
Yeah,
let
sure.
me just say something here, though in part of answer. What we should do for women to continue in their careers, I think, is have support groups of women at different stages of their career who advise each other and support them. So I have been involved in an initiative where we have workshops for women in physics. We have various initiatives, I can tell people about them later, which a lot of women have said have helped them to stay in their career. And right now, for example, in the last week, I've been talking with some of my current and former women students and found that they're all struggling with this issue of family versus career. And we've decided that all of us will just start a group where we will have an online coffee together once in a way and just talk about some of these issues. So at least you don't have to bear all this burden alone, but it's a shared burden.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, question from Sandeep.
Yeah, thanks, Vandana. Thank you very much, Shobhana, for really, a very thought-provoking talk and quite a disturbing talk. And thanks so much for sharing your own experiences, difficult as it has been. Especially, I noted the disturbing statistics about TIFR. I knew some of that, but in a national context, it does stand out even more starkly. And I wanted to ask you this, and I'm very happy Vandana is also here, and maybe some of the others. When we got our NAC accreditation done a few years ago, one of the members of the committee who had been involved with the university sector all his life hammered the same point to me about the gender ratio in our students. And the point he emphasized, which stuck with me, was if you look at girl students in the university system completing, say, their bachelor's or master's, women do very well, as we actually know in various exams and so on. And he said he had the statistics. So they do very well at that, but he said they're not making it into your entrance test. They're not qualifying in our entrance exams and so on. I don't have all the statistics, but I was very happy that this summer, Vandana and Amol and others started this Vigyan Vidushi program, where the idea is that we bring girl students a year or so before they would be applying to the TIFR system to sensitize them a little bit to us and so on, maybe take the fear out a bit, whatever, make them more comfortable. With the hope that their intrinsic abilities would get better reflected in the testing and so on. I wanted to ask you what your own thoughts were on this. Is it true?
No, I'm in a seminar. I have to ask.
Don't do as well. I don't want to make a statement appropriate. Just to ask you, in written tests, pressure situations, perhaps, can we do more so that we get more well-qualified women into our research, into our graduate programs?
So I don't know exactly what is the problem with TIFR, in the sense that in JNC, in our group, the theoretical sciences unit, if you average over all the years, I think we would be close to 50% women. And so it would be interesting to see what is happening at TIFR.
Yeah.
I have some statistics, if I may.
Yeah.
I looked at the numbers for the last 3 years. The number of women and men appearing for the written exam in maths and physics and chemistry are equal. Okay, so we actually have like 1,692,
Yeah.
1,700 men appear for the test. Biology, there are many more women who appear for the test. The attrition is dramatic in terms of being called for the interview, and this is based on the marks alone. And then there is a further attrition post-interview in some of the subjects. So that's the data. It's something that I plan to discuss and so on, but this is the data.
But Shobhana, you're saying it's not so in JNCASR, if I understand.
So I don't know about all the departments, and I don't know exactly the statistics, but at least in our group, it has not been so. We don't see a completely male-dominated group, but so I will try to find the numbers and tell you. But I don't know, but I do think in general, women do have a big problem with self-confidence, okay? And I don't understand why this is so. And I also don't understand why then they do okay in written exams, but not in interviews. Now, Sandeep, you have known me like whatever, 40 years or whatever. I don't know if you realize that I've always been totally terrified of exams and lack self-confidence. I get really scared to give a talk. I get really scared to give an exam. Before my TIFR interview, I cried both before and after. So I don't know what it is.
Yeah, maybe we can move on to the next question. There are quite a few. So Ravi.
Yeah, Shobhana, I mean, this is, there are pockets where this problem is extremely serious and they may be only shared better in some other areas and so on. But, I mean, science itself is not a very favored thing in India, right? And I wanted to know what, if you've done survey of areas like, which are sort of flourishing like IT and so on, how women do there. That's number one. And number two, I think, of course, we should do everything that we can at every level. But what is your opinion about how schools treat girl students? And where does it have to be corrected, from the ground level up?
Yeah, so I think that there's certainly problems at every level. I myself went to a girls' school, and there are lots of people who would argue that girls' schools are better because there is no explicit discrimination in that sense. I went to IIT, which I thought was awful, completely sexist environment, completely horrible. But if you look at the percentage, we really have the problem percentage-wise after the PhD. So this, I think, okay, this is my personal opinion, but my personal opinion is that our problems are really begin when women get married and have children. That is the biggest problem in India. This is not so true, I would say, for example, in the US. For example, in the US, many women I knew told me that they were told by teachers, you're a girl, you cannot do maths, you cannot do science. I was never told this. I was told something different. I was told by a teacher at IIT, you do not need to have a career in physics because you're a woman, but you are very good, which is a slightly different thing. It's subtle. It took me a while to realize that. So I really think our biggest problem is not about whether women are encouraged to study science, whether women are encouraged to study maths. I think our problem is this feeling that women should not pursue careers actively, especially demanding careers.
So, yeah, sorry, but what about the industries like IT? How do women do there?
So I'm told that women do fairly well there. It is also very interesting, for example, that in medicine, which is a very demanding career,
Exactly.
there are lots of women,
Yeah.
and women do very well, and they often have to work long hours, etc. So I don't know what it is, whether, for example, if there's this feeling that if you can make a lot of money, then that's a compensation, whereas in science, you don't have that compensation of making a lot of money. You have to work very hard without the appropriate monetary rewards.
Thank you.
Can I just add a small comment? When I was an undergrad, some of the family friends said that, oh, if you're a doctor, it is at least better you can treat your own kids. What will you do if you're an engineer? So I think in India, the large percentage being in doctors, it's also because the female doctors are preferred by a certain class of society. That's my opinion. Yeah. There are also quite a few comments in the YouTube. I'm sorry. In the
Vandana, can I quickly ask a question? This is
Just 1 minute. 1 minute. I was just saying that this chat we can later share a copy with that. So we go ahead with a question from Sandhya.
Vandana, can I just quickly ask?
Please go ahead with your question.
Okay. So, Shobhana, this is. I had a question because if you look at data of female labor force participation in India, for now almost a decade, it has been going down. I think it was at its peak sometime in the late 90s. And this is across the board. If you look, it's much worse in rural India, but certainly in urban India. And in fact, it tracks I would say, the general overall betterment of the economic situation of the country. Do you have any sort of data which looks at women labor force participation in this context, where it sort of has it gone down in the past 10 years as opposed to, say, 20 years ago, or is it a steadily rising graph going against what is a national trend? In fact, that is a trend even that you see in South Asia. Pakistan is a great example. Pakistani doctors are an even better example.
So, as far as I remember, if you look at the percentage of, say, science PhDs that are going to women, or the R&D workforce percentage that is women, it is going up, the percentage of women, but very slowly. I don't think it is declining.
Thank you.
Sudipta.
Hi, this is Sudipta here. Just this morning, I was having a discussion with a friend and colleague of mine about the bad ratio of women in science, especially in TIFR, and how to improve that ratio. And one thing that I was trying to think about is that nowadays many journals would accept an anonymous submission. That is, you can hide your name. The referees don't know your names, etc., and which place you come from. So obviously that's not possible ultimately to when you try to take somebody as a colleague, because there'll be in-person meetings at the final stages. But do you think it will help if the search committee, so most places that operate with a search committee where the CV comes in, and then you decide to call that person for an interview or not? Do you think it will help if we uniformly make a rule that the search committee meets at one place together without access to internet, and an anonymized CV comes in and they give a grade to that CV? Okay, sure, you draw a boundary and say we'll call everybody above that and all. At least we have increased the percentage, most likely, of people who are from a disadvantaged group. And therefore, by that I mean women and probably others also, depending on the country, it could be Muslims or wherever. And at least we have gotten to that. Then, of course, final thing will come in, and bias, either inherent or completely explicit bias will come in. But if the initial grade and the final hiring, if there's a large discrepancy, we have to look ourselves in the mirror.
Do you think something like that can help?
I think
it's a hard problem to solve.
Try to work out something like that, but it's very hard to see how it would work in practice, because you would need recommendation letters, which are an important part of the process, and there you would get to know. And the other thing is, what about bias at earlier stages? For example, today I was reading a paper which said that if you look at percentage of papers in science or nature, then the percentage which have lead authors who are women is much less. And so presumably there's some discrimination going on there also. And now if you have a paper in science or nature, you're obviously much more likely to get a faculty position and to be ranked higher, even if it is double blind or whatever. So if you
but this part is in our hand, the double blindness, whatever we get. Yeah. Right. Sorry.
So but it's certainly one step forward, I think.
Okay, I think there are lots of questions. It will probably take two more. So one from Shankar and then from Saurabh.
So this is regarding the students who qualify for the exams in like TIFR. Typically, entrance examinations are rejection examinations. It's not, it's not meant to absorb people how to reject people because the seats are finite. So given that there is a discrepancy at the school level, that the way the boys and girls are treated at families, and it's on an average true, the kind of education that the boy and a girl gets, the boy goes to a different school, a girl goes to a different school, brothers and sisters I'm talking about. Do you think this reflects when you have entrance kind of things at educational institutions, and where you have entrance, typically there the ratio gets skewed up?
Yeah, so I was just thinking more about Sandeep's question also, and I was wondering because most institutes have maybe a written exam, but we finally decide based on an interview, right? And I was wondering, an interview is always a subjective assessment. And in an interview, we are judging not just the answers, we are discussing, we are evaluating them for, can they think on their feet? Are they creative? Are they thinking logically? And there's much more subject. So I'm wondering if there's some kind of implicit bias that's going on in all our minds, and whether we are evaluating male and female students differently.
So Shobhana,
on the interview.
Sorry, I mean, if Shubha might correct me, but I think that the number of students who qualify for the written tests itself has a bias.
Yeah.
So people who sit for the examination are 50-50, but number of them who qualify for these entrance tests are biased towards boys, and then obviously you have the other interview that probably makes it still worse.
Then I really don't know what to say.
Okay.
But I wonder, I mean, for the IITs, people say it is because more men than women go to coaching classes. Do you think the coaching classes help them also in the written test? That is a possibility, right? Because because many parents send their sons rather than their daughters to these coaching classes. And it is possible that the coaching classes help them answer the kinds of questions that are asked in the interview. I mean, not in the interview, in the written test.
Because their master's degree, if you look at the master's degree results, then girls do as good as boys.
Okay.
So maybe it's the coaching classes then that's making a difference.
Okay, one last question from Saurabh, and then we will go over to YouTube. Saurabh.
Okay, so yeah, so this data is very staggering. So I have heard this from many people now. So it seems like in academia there is a special case where the gender ratio is really biased, and I heard that you have some solutions like gender sensitization and creation of equitable workplaces, but these are all long-term solutions. But do you have any recommendations which are near-term, which are serious and can be practically sort of implemented that can change the ratio particularly in Indian academia at the faculty level, let's say?
So, well, some people, of course, advocate a quota system. This is very controversial. I am honestly a bit confused about it, because that would be one way of correcting the imbalance, of course. But I also think that any woman who was hired through this quota would probably be treated terribly by her colleagues. Okay? Would be resented, not treated as an equal, etc. But that's the only quick fix I can think of. But I do think that these workshops of the kind I've been conducting for women in physics, they're not very long-term solutions. Like, I mean, these are just 5-day workshops, and women who take these workshops who are planning to drop out then stay in the workforce. So I think these kinds of workshops are actually rather powerful.
Okay.
Yeah, Satya, you want to take some YouTube questions?
Yeah, so let me look at, there's one question from Pradeep Chatterjee. We, in bracket, men should teach us to change our sense of gender discrimination. But how is it possible in different fields? Because gender discrimination is now a natural phenomenon. Is there any real solution to this, and how we apply it? So it's again slightly a general question if you want to kind of put some more thought in this.
Okay, so I really think the first thing is to accept that it's a real thing, because many people don't accept that there is any discrimination. And also, if somebody accuses you, or not accuse perhaps is the wrong word, tells you that you might have some bias, one shouldn't react with outrage and get angry and all that, but be open to the idea and think what to do. I mean, because I was once on some selection committee where I felt that there was some bias in how the men and women colleagues, candidates were evaluated. And I quietly afterwards told somebody this, and he was really, really upset. I mean, he felt that I had accused him of a terrible thing and he refused to talk to me and all this. But, you know, instead, I just wanted him to go back and look at it and see if he had evaluated the male candidates and the female candidates differently, because I felt a different subjective lens had been applied. Because the woman, for example, had taken certain decisions in her career which were influenced by her family circumstances, and she had been evaluated very harshly as a consequence. And so I think if we just accept that this is, as you say, inevitable or whatever, but not inevitable, but that it happens, get sensitized to it, and then watch out for it in yourself. And keep asking yourself, am I being fair? Am I being equitable? I think that's a huge step forward.
Satya, you have any more questions?
No, not anymore, but you still
two
have
hands there, so we'll take last two questions. First Vivek and then Mandar.
Okay, this is Vivek. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so both are kind of comments. One comment pertains to an outstanding physicist named Lisa Meitner,
yes.
whom was, nominated about 45 times, a roughly equal number of times in chemistry and physics, and who didn't finally get the Nobel Prize.
Yes.
She was nominated by people like Einstein, Planck, and so on. And the person who got the Nobel Prize was Otto Hahn, who was a man who was actually his junior collaborator, her junior collaborator. That's and then she went to Stockholm, and she was treated very badly there by another Nobel laureate called Sigban, and so on. So that's just a comment. Because she was an equally outstanding physicist.
It's not an isolated story by any means. There are many such stories.
Yeah. Okay. The other comment is pertaining to a recent conference called Neutrino 2020, which was conducted online And there were equal number of, I think, organizers, female and male. Similarly, the people who conducted the talks, the chairpersons, were also equal in number, female and male. And also there was a large percentage of female invited speakers. I think about 35 to 40%. So that's probably just a nice thing that happened. Maybe it's isolated, but maybe more.
No, but I think that tells you something important, that if you have a large percentage of organizers who are women, then you, as almost as a corollary, you tend to have a lot of speakers who are women, etc.
Yeah, possible. Thank you.
Thanks, Shobhana. Very interesting. I just had I think the point that you're making about acknowledging that there is a problem is kind of very important. I just wanted to sort of narrate an incident in our own department at TIFR. About 10 plus years ago, there was an external review committee which made a comment in the written report saying that there are no women faculty members and in the department, and something needs to be done proactively. And I mean, the widespread reaction in the department was a bit shocking. Particularly, I was kind of new to the TIFR system. Was that that we have no problem at our end. We have never come across a good candidate. And I think
that's a fairly standard response. That's a completely standard response.
That was a kind of a shocking statement, too easy to deflect the point that you're trying to make, which is to acknowledge that there is an issue. Thank you.
And we were also reviewed by an external review committee who found some problems with us, including a gender imbalance. And every point that they raised was addressed except this one. And the defense for this was, oh, we have Shobhana and she works a lot for gender equity. So we've done our bit as far as that area is concerned.
Yeah, that's a wonderful answer, because you really are doing good for gender equity, but that cannot be the thing. Thank you so much for a really wonderful and thought-provoking presentation. And I'm sure like your Vigyan Vidushi talk, it's going to get lots of hits on the YouTube and people will watch it. So it's very informative.
Thank you, everybody. And
thanks to, I'll hand it back to Satya now, because we're going to miss the chai after this, but some other time, hopefully.
Yeah, I should go to the West Canteen.
That is something which we are not able to incorporate in the online versions, but as I think many mentioned, it is a very, very thought-provoking lecture by you, Professor Shobhana, and I hope there is a lot of introspection that happens at various stages, of course, including the comments that you also made, I think, which are kind of known for last few years, and several other fora also this has come up. And I hope there will be sort of corrections that will happen in the years to come. Thank you very much once again for taking your time and engaging with this such a nice talk, and also patiently answering all the questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay.